Some of you might have been, a few of them, it seems like you've been through most of the sessions, so I will save you. I won't be talking very long. So today I'm just acting as the moderator, is probably not the right word, but introducing our panel. And so the topic today, it's a pretty heavy topic, and this has to do with the aftermath of shooting. It's not a hypothetical of what if, this is actually what happened. So this is actually going to take place. We're going to have 2 sessions because there's a lot to talk about. So I just would like to introduce Pat Lindsay, who is trial court judge. Well, trial court judge at many places, but you'll be talking about specifically about Cedarville in this circumstance, correct?
In part, yes.
In part, and as well as your other
Correct.
Court experiences. Judge Lawrence King from Colorado River Indian Tribes, who will be saying what he needs to say, and then Nikki Mulholland, who's also Nikki. What are you? What's your title?
I'm the tribal administrator for the Cedarville Ranch Review.
Okay, so she's the tribal administrator. So why don't we just give them a welcome, and I'll let them speak. So thank you for your time.
All right, first of all, everybody have a good lunch? I don't need this in front of me. All right, I want everybody to stand up, okay? We're gonna do a little wellness exercise, which we'll fold in a little bit later. So that's good. So let's shake it out, okay? All right, then what we're gonna do is like we breathe in, so we raise it, breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in. Breathe out. Okay, shake it out one more time. All right, let's be seated. Okay. All right. We're going to talk about how this is going to be broken down to. I'm going to talk about what happens when we have situations in the court. How do you plan? And then we're going to have an open discussion. So this is not we lecturing to you. This is how we talk about things that happen, your experiences, because we'll all learn from each other, and things that we can do down the road. Now, there have been numerous seminars that we probably all have had to attend to, or been told we need to do. But it all comes down to planning and managing risks, okay? Everybody says, well, you have a security plan and nothing's gonna happen at your court. Or you'll hear, especially in tribal court, we don't really need security because we know everybody and their family and nothing's gonna happen, okay? And we'll talk about that a little bit later. You can get a little closer to me, okay?
Sorry.
No problem. I want you a little closer to me because I see you, okay? All right. This slide, and if you notice in this particular slide, it says, are required, but it's crossed out, should maintain current emergency management plan, which describes the actions to be taken during an emergency to ensure the safety of your court staff, court users, and court visitors.
Before you move on, if you went to Judge Burke's session, actually I need the mic aimed this way.
Okay.
If you went to Judge Burke's session yesterday, he talked about having a plan, but he added a couple of points that are important. You gotta read the plan, and then you have to drill the plan. And Judge King can tell you about how it went when we had a drill at CRIT, because I also am a judge at Colorado River Indian Tribes.
We've had a couple fire drills. We've had a couple bomb scares. I've had a bomb scare with sarin gas that was supposedly released at a court that's above us in a valley that was going to be sent. We're downwind, it was real interesting to find out what was not available when I asked certain questions. I have one of my associate judges here who, at lunchtime, I was telling him about how I was mad at him when we had a bomb scare and he went back into the building to go get his medication, which I was mad at him because I didn't want to have to call his wife to say something happened to him because I happen to like him, okay? But it also told me that I need to make sure that he has his medicine, and I need to make sure everybody else has their medicine that needs their medicine if we have an incident in this court. So how do we take care of those particular things? One of our meeting places is our gym. Our gym has been closed down for the last 14 months. So I don't have a meeting place because I can congregate there. So I have to come up with another meeting place if something were to happen. So those are the types of things that we do plan, but we don't plan enough and we don't table talk it enough. So you don't necessarily have to tell everybody to get out of the building, but put everybody in a conference room and say, if this happens, what's going to happen, who's assigned, and what are they going to do? Emergency planning, management planning compensates basically four components: your preparedness, your prevention, your response, and recovery. And a lot of what we're going to talk about a little bit later is going to be about recovery. And I'm only going to talk about this brief stuff, the first three briefly. Preparedness, again, plan. You got to have that management plan. You got to make sure you execute it and you know where it is and what you have to do. Prevention, dedicated to mitigating the emergencies, including trauma that may happen. Now, I happen to be a state court judge. One of my clerks, I was informed, was told that her ex-husband, wants to kill her. So the remedy plan right now is she parks in a secure parking place with the police department. Our court security goes and gets her and escorts her back to the court. Now, on first blush, that sounds good. Now, can anybody tell me what may be wrong with that or what additional questions you should ask about that particular plan?
Other than me?
Well, you could go on.
ahead.
It's part of the discussion.
I know the answer. Anyway, if he hunts, if he has rifles,
Absolutely.
Yes,
to shoot from range.
right. And it's like, is your ex-husband a hunter? Yes, he's a hunter. Okay, well, there are good hunters and bad hunters. The question, has he gotten an elk or has he gotten a deer lately? That's how I'm going to determine whether he's a good hunter or a bad hunter, okay? Because now our range, our perimeter that we have to be concerned about is not 15 feet because we're escorting him back and forth and that's what the officers are at, but it may be 100 yards. It may be 500 yards. It may be even longer if he's decent at what he does, okay, and if he's really intent on killing her. And that is a situation that I thought about even more so when we were in another conference where the judge from Reno got shot, okay, in his chambers, through the window, and the individual who shot him from a garage, which was across the river, and it had to be at least a 100-yard shot. Now think about it, through a window similar to that, probably a little bit smaller to the one to our right, to be able to pick him off. So those are the types of things you need to talk about. Now, think about response. Not all emergencies are preventable, as we know. Some things are going to happen, some things, despite how we plan. And then what happens afterwards to minimizing the effect of the emergencies which do occur. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about here today. We're also going to talk about recovery. The courts have a major responsibility in doing emergencies. How do you support those individuals which may be traumatized as a result of their exposure to the emergency?
And again, before you move on, Nikki and I had a couple of points that we wanted to make on this slide. One of the things I wanted to bring up was we talked about yesterday with Judge King, having a go kit for your court that's ready so that you can move on to a new location. Having, as he mentioned a little while ago, a place that you know you're going to gather together after you have to leave the building. Somebody has to account for all the staff. So, there was the news story yesterday about the parents with 10 kids that left one in a cornfield overnight, a corn maze. I mean, you got to count for your staff. So you have to know who's in charge of counting for which staff. First responders, reaction to stress, to the press, and Nikki, you wanted to address something about a press statement.
I think Basically, the information that I am here today to give you is to, if you guys already have an emergency plan in place or are thinking about putting an emergency plan in place, is to help you think of putting some things into these plans that you wouldn't regularly think of. And one of the things that came up was we were continually asked for a statement for the press. And the way our tribe works is that nothing can be released unless we have full tribal vote. And when you have three of your tribal members that had just been murdered, and you have multiple in the hospital, how do you do that? Do you have a blanket statement, even if it's asking for the press to, honor your time until you are able to give a better statement, or do you have, what are you going to do? Because you're going to be asked continuously for those sorts of things.
Simple things like, do you have the phone numbers? May I have the mic back?
What did you do?
Oh, go
I
ahead.
mean, how did you resolve it?
We actually, we never gave a press release, and it really left the community wondering, and in our community, it's very, very, very small.
And I think everybody may or may not know, but Pat, would you like to explain what transpired, or do you?
We're gonna get there.
Okay, all right.
We'll get there.
All right.
May I have the mic, though? What happened in the immediate aftermath at Cedarville is that the press all showed up. And the attorney for the tribe that was not directly involved in the incident, there were two attorneys, so the other attorney took on the role of press secretary just for want of, there was a vacuum and somebody had to, and we couldn't get a vote done in time to do it properly and put out a statement. So he ended up being the face of the tribe, but with no blanket statement prepared in advance or no statement that we could get out immediately after. The speculation was insane in the newspaper and in the TV media about what caused the incident. So think about having a pre-approved blanket statement that, may say something from your tribe about, we are in a time of crisis and we need time to talk with, heal among ourselves, or look at the press statements that celebrities put out after something big happens, or cities do, where they give kind of a vague statement. It's prepared in advance. Give us time to mourn, and we will get back to your type of statement.
Or we're still investigating it.
It's an active investigation. We can't comment. Have cell numbers for your council members, though, because we didn't necessarily have an easily obtained list of everybody that needed to be reached right away. And then have somebody that's an official stand-in for the tribe in the event that you can't do the proper channels to handle the proper type of statement in a timely manner. Go ahead. I guess it is this.
You're here.
I guess, no, one more slide. This one, go ahead.
All right, well, again, we're back to it. Try as you might, you can't prevent every incident. One of the things you need to understand is that incidents going to happen during hearings in court, in the building when there are no hearings, and others, and nearby officers or staff outside the court. Prevention cannot address what to do or what to expect when something violent has happened, as much as we try. Some of the expected things, though, are funerals, medical treatment, interrupted hearings, etc. And so you need to understand what you may have to do afterwards or in the meantime. One of the things that we discussed yesterday was in the incident that happened in Cedarville, when there was an investigation, people came in and started gathering evidence because it was an active crime scene. So they're taking material that you have for a court hearing that's going on, and at some point in time that court hearing has to be resolved. Is there an inventory? What was taken? What do you need to continue that hearing? how do you address those particular issues, and who's going to address those issues? And I'm sure Nikki will talk about it a little bit more, so will Judge Lindsay. You know, what is not expected is everything else that may come up, okay? And everything else, you never know. In my state court, we had an incident where we had an individual who started bleeding, okay, and I had a pool of blood that showed up in our courtroom, which then created a hazmat situation. So it's not just let's go out into, you know, the local grocery store or Home Depot where we get the little rug doctor and clean up the rug in there, but you don't know the particulars about that particular individual. It is a biohazard, and so our court had to be shut down until we got clearance for the place being cleaned. These are a couple things that we talk about for planning, but now we're going to talk about.
Well, before we get there,
Okay,
one more
keep
thing.
going.
There were a couple of things that happened when I was a state court prosecutor for over 20 years. So one time I was sitting at counsel table and a person came up to speak at the sentencing for a homicide case. And they broke a number of rules. They came into the well, which was against the rules in that court, but nobody enforced it. The person that was speaking was holding something in their hands, which never should be allowed in a courtroom. It was a very emotional person who directly addressed the defendant because her family member had been killed. So again, instead of focusing the comments to the judge, which alleviates some of the stress that might build in a person, this person was yelling at the defendant directly. And what she had in her hands was a picture frame of the deceased family member, full frame with glass, and when she got to one point of the statement, she said, instead of planning his wedding, we were planning his funeral, and she slammed the glass frame down on the table. And I sat there trying to be polite, which I will never be polite in a courtroom and stay if I have a feeling something's wrong. But she was trying, as she slammed it down, the glass hit the table, shattered, came up, hit me in the face. This is a state courtroom in Sacramento. I've had somebody get tasered in a courtroom when they've gone, you know, a defendant's jumped up and they've been shackled to a chair, but they still ended up tasered. Had somebody come over the table at me when I was giving a closing statement during a trial. So there's all kinds of things that we're not just talking about Cedarville, we're talking about any court anywhere. Go ahead. So we're here.
We're here. Let's talk about stories.
Well, the reason the Kleenex is out is because it's been 3.5 years since Cedarville shooting happened. And as you can see, the emotion is still there. It's really hard to talk about it in detail without reliving it. And so we have Kleenex for us, we have Kleenex for you guys, because we are going to be talking about some things that may bring up emotions in all of you. For Cedarville, I had just been sworn in as judge. I was telephonic. I was actually at crit. They set the hearing short. So I was supposed to be there, but because it was short set, I couldn't be until the next day. So by a fluke, I ended up on the, your phone is picking up on the mic. By a fluke, I ended up on the phone. And the first 5 minutes of the hearing, my phone call on my cell phone is 9 minutes. So I know that at the beginning of my phone call, everybody's alive. And about 3.5, 4 minutes into it, the hearing starts. And the last 3 minutes of the hearing is actually the entire incident. And it was video and audio recorded, but as I was asking questions of the defendant, who was just being evicted from housing, so just an eviction in a civil matter, I asked her a question, and her answer was very direct to my question. My question was, what other options do you have with regard to your housing eviction that gives you more than 30 days notice? And her answer was, I have other options. And that's when she pulled out a gun and killed the first person. At my end of the phone, I didn't realize that was what was happening. I heard a crash, and everyone was silent. Then I kept hearing crash, crash, crash. Well, it turns out those were all the gunshots. And I did hear someone cry out, and the phone went dead. So I was talking to Judge King and Judge Lawrence at CRIT, trying to ask them, what do you think happened? What's going on? And it took a while. And I called for a welfare check, and by the time I reached back to there, I was transferred to another agency, and being law enforcement, I knew that meant mutual aid, and I knew it was bad. And he said, it's an active crime scene. We need your contact information. Once he confirmed that I knew so much about what was going on and who was there, that I obviously was really on the phone with them. Nikki, go ahead.
I won't get too much into it, but it was our very first tribal court hearing, and the members of the Cedarville Rancheria were all gathered for this momentous occasion, and so regularly court would not be so well attended, but we had many members that were there that were very excited for this day, and we had children in the back, and I was there taking meeting minutes, and I actually was sitting next to the shooter when it happened, and so I just want to be here to kind of help everybody with what happened after, without getting into too much of the shooting, but it did leave 3 of our tribal members murdered, and our our tribal administrator, and a couple other people were shot. So.
And you have to deal with those particular issues. At our court, we've had some unfortunate incidents where we've had one of our clerks working, and then people come tell her, we found your sister. She was floating in a canal. She's dead. I've had one of our staff members, my resource coordinator, go home and to find her brother had committed suicide. My lead clerk, my judicial clerk of the court, called me one evening because I was staying in the court late, that she had gone home and she found her mom sitting on a telephone pole out a couple yards down from the house. She was dead. And so those are the types of things that you have to you deal with, and then you figure out, okay, so yes, we have a magnetometer, yes, we have the x-ray machine, yes, we want people coming in the courtroom. However, things happen, okay? So when those things happen, how do you address those in the aftermath, and how do you deal with the fact that you have people that are not going to be around? There's trauma going through the place. There could be building damage. Again, do you have the go kit? How do you continue your operations? How do you address your staff needs and the trauma that may be inflicted?
So, as part of this presentation, I want to ask all of you, I tagged Las Vegas there for a few reasons. But first, I want to ask, by a show of hands, how many of you have experienced yourself personally gun violence? Raise your hands. Just, okay, you can put them back down. Now, how many of you have had somebody close to you be the victim of a homicide? Show of hands. Okay, put your hands down. How many of you have been involved directly in a mass shooting of some sort? We win, only once, huh? Now let's go one layer out though. How many of you have had, even if you've already raised your hand, a cousin, a family member, a staff member, a coworker involved in a mass shooting, gun violence, any kind of homicide, any kind of violent crime? Oh, look, it's almost the entire room raising your hand. So you know what we're talking about. You've experienced it yourself or one layer out. And then when you think about there's some other crime that impacted your workplace or something else intense, like maybe a flood or the wildfires that are happening in California are, possibly burning down some tribal courts for all we know, but definitely threatening tribal enterprises and other people's homes. We had a friend of mine I was meeting for dinner last night, and she had to go back to California because a number of her staff have lost their homes in these fires, and she's going back to coordinate emergency services. And then there's other kinds of tragedies like the air show in Reno or other things. So there's trauma that can come at you from many directions or impact you or your staff or some employees or other. And that's why we want to help prepare, is there are things that we're not considering in security plans that need to be added in. Go ahead.
Okay. Again, it's more than just physical injuries or loss of staff in planning. So I think we covered this one before we got there.
Yeah.
Now, how does this affect your court?
So one click and it'll go to the next.
Okay. There are immediate effects, interim effects, and long-term effects. Some of the immediate effects.
They might be that it's a crime scene, like Judge King was talking about. I know Judge Burke talked about some suggestions of things that might happen immediately if you were at his session. Maybe it's the have your active shooter plan. The immediate effects are you able to run and get away? Must you hide and shelter in place? Are you not able to do either of those and your only option is to fight? Those are the immediate effects. The other immediate effect, if it's in the middle of a court hearing, well, the hearing gets interrupted, staff has to leave the building, or maybe staff needs first aid, or yourself, or something else happens. So there's some immediate effects.
When at Cedarville, what were some of the immediate stuff that you had to take care of when you were there?
Some of the immediate effects were if you don't already have some way to account for who's in the building. We didn't know who we had lost until towards the very end. We didn't have any emergency plan at all, like zero. So we basically were all just huddling outside. And then our court is actually held in our tribal office. And so that shut down all of our tribal operations, not just our court. That meaning that we could not function as a tribe at that moment because we did not have a government, because our interim tribal chairman was murdered. We didn't have a council. So we basically had to put the stops on everything. We also have a commercial business. So we had to immediately contact our accounting crew and our lawyer to make sure that we could pay our employees still, that our commercial business would still be running, and that those were some of the immediate effects on my end, since court was held in my tribal office.
And immediate effects that you may have had, Judge King, at CRIT when some of these things, employees have gone home and had this kind of incident at home.
Well, one of the things that we attempt to do is cross-train everybody so that everybody can pick up someone else's work in case if they're not there. And I think everybody does that here, if you have the luxury of having more than one clerk in your court. But when we had one of our bomb scares, when it came in, we have a bomb scare, we call the police department because they have the jurisdiction. They come over. Next thing you know, that everybody is leaving the building. And when I mean everybody's leaving the building, we have an auto shop that's close to us. They told everybody to leave there. We have the tribal administrative office, which is not located within the court. And all my council members and everybody took off. They went and had lunch someplace, okay? At Colorado River Indian Tribes, we theoretically have a person who's in charge of Homeland Security, quote unquote, that's supposed to be the harbinger of our emergency management plan, when I said supposed to be. And love her dearly, however, I've learned from listening to people in La Paz County and there that if we don't do it ourselves, it's not gonna get done. So we make sure that it gets done. And frankly, we don't practice enough. I will tell you that. We don't practice enough. Probably should practice more, but there's some steps that I'm working on to make sure that it happens. Now, I don't want to plug one particular advertiser or not, but there's a gentleman out here with JVAS, whatever it was, the audio people, and they have this little kit that I'm really interested in because I'm creating, as we said, a Go kit. It'll be a laptop computer. It'll be a recording device. Our case management system is digitized, so therefore we can plug into it anywhere we need to in case we don't have our computers up and running at that particular building. So we can have continued court operations in another facility if we need it. But what I need to do, even more so, understanding the immediate effects, is who's going to be in charge in case something happens. Now, we have a delegation, but that doesn't really help all the time if you have a delegation, if the people that you're delegating your authority to are involved in the accident or the emergency or the incident. So therefore, you have to figure out what's going to happen going down the race. And then, frankly, there's some people that are just not going to be there because something happened. So you have to figure out, when our clerk whose sister was found dead, it's like, you need to take as much time off as you need because you're going to have funeral issues you can deal with. That was a crime scene. She's a victim. And so therefore, it went to federal prosecution. I had FBI agents coming through to talk to her. I had our own police department coming through to talk to her. It was an ongoing investigation because they didn't know exactly who did it. But she needed time so that she could go to Flagstaff to go for the various hearings. And the thing is, just let me know. Sometimes you won't know, but let me know, and we'll figure out how to make this schedule work so that you can go take care of the business you have to take care of. And that was that immediate effect.
The internal court impact in our court involved, we had a hearing that was disrupted, let us say, in the middle of the hearing. So we had this impact of that happening, our records being seized as evidence from the crime scene and the computers and everything that we needed, all the recordings, the video, the audio, everything for the hearing that led up to why we were having a hearing and the hearing itself was all seized as evidence. So we had this internal effect of how do we continue and resolve this? Because now she's in jail, the shooter, but we haven't finished the eviction hearing yet. There's a process we had to finish. And then there's these external impact on the court operations. I was talking to Judge Blake a while back, and their courthouse burned down. So there might be something that's external where you lose your building, or there's a flood and you lose your building completely. So in that kind of a situation, then there might be something external, or it might be because your building is no longer open, the other agent or the other people, the court users, can't come to your building. So it's an external effect of the community doesn't know, I got to file for a restraining order. Your court's closed. You haven't got a building to be used right now. How do we get a restraining order if we need it? So there's a lot of effects that can happen. Nikki, are there other things you wanted to add here?
When it came to our all of the documents that we had and what we were working on during the hearing itself, we didn't know that you can ask for an inventory of the evidence that was taken. We had no idea. Nobody had told us that. We didn't know what was taken. They had taken all of our cell phones and all of our laptops and everything. And so all of those people that you needed to call, you didn't have any numbers. That goes back to making sure that when you, in your safety plan, you have these things nailed down. I actually had to get on my daughter's little Kindle and email our lawyers to let them know what was going on, because I didn't have any other way to get in contact with them, and we were not allowed into the building at all, as it was an active crime scene. And since we live in a small rural community, we actually had to have the agency that came and did the crime scene investigation had to come over 3 hours away. So waiting for that to even wrap up was very, very long and drawn out. And one of the things that came from that day is that we ended up having to do an adoption. We had minor children that needed to be taken care of from that day as well, and finding out where that child was taken and who had that child. And we had no, at that time, we didn't have any leadership at all.
I have a question to ask everybody. How many people have sign-in sheets for their court? So when someone comes to your court building, do you ask them or require them to sign in? Okay. All right. Have the courts that do have that, have you ever gotten any opposition from people as why do we have to sign in, et cetera?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, what was your response?
Too bad.
Okay. Thank you, Judge Burke. Can I borrow that one? Okay. I got that once. Why do you have to why do I have to sign in? Why do you want to know I'm here? And I told the person, I said, look, I'm responsible for your safety when you come to my building till you leave my building. Okay. And I said my building. And the person looked at me like, well, you're not a tribal member. What are you talking about? I said, well, yeah, I'm responsible for your safety. And their attitude changed drastically after I told them that. And so it's little things like that that you need to go back to. How do you account for everybody? What happens and where are you going to go? The external impact, again, you know, we were shut down for a period of time. I remember when we had one particular incident, I believe Judge Lawrence was having a hearing, was told what's going on, and had to stop his hearing in the middle of the hearing and then pick it up going on forward. And it's those types of things. How do you deal with that? There are, again, personnel impacts that happen. You know, you deal with time off. How do you address your personnel? Do you actually have the people you need now to run your court? Your court user impact, you know, the public. We're a service industry, despite what people like to say. I like to say we're a service industry. Our clients are sometimes people that do bad things, sometimes people do good things. Outside impacts to others that are not using the court, primarily, again, there are surrounding buildings that may be shut down. If your court occupies a space that's used for other particular things and something happens, you may not be able to get back into that space. As Nikki just talked about at Cedarville, since they were using a tribal chambers that was used for their council meetings.
So plan where you're gonna hold court. If you can't use your building, if your files have been burned down, where are you gonna hold court? How are you gonna recreate those files? What's your process for doing that? One of the other things, not only do you have to move to another building potentially temporarily, because at Cedarville, there was a ceremony to smudge the building after there were people coming in to remodel the building, and there are crime scene restoration companies. Something you don't think about every day, but there are companies that's their business, is to come in, tear up the carpeting, put in new floors, put in new walls, change where the doors are, replace the furniture with the bullet holes in it. It's a very strange thing, but there are people that clean up that blood, that move all of that get rid of all those hazardous materials that are in there. I was at one court where they used to store the drugs in the closet in the courtroom. Well, now that's a hazmat location, so they had to bring in hazmat to clean that. There are companies that do that. Know that there are companies that can clean up your building, but just because you've cleaned your building doesn't mean you could necessarily use it, depending on the culture of the tribe. At Cedarville, thank you. At Cedarville, we were able to have a ceremony, and Nikki was present for it. I was not, but she can talk about the ceremony, but I will tell you that with a discussion with Judge Lawrence, there are other tribes where, no, if this happened at a building, you can never use that building again. Cedarville was in a position they could. Go ahead and tell them about ceremony or something to
Well,
that.
and if you're gonna have it, if you're gonna have your building clean,
Is it on?
make sure you know who's going to have the keys to open the building. Who is going to allow the cleaning people in there? Your insurance company will more than likely be very, very helpful, and I have that to be thankful for. But I had to be the one who opened the building, and that was really hard. And we actually were able to have the Native Wellness Institute come, and they did some healing projects with our Native youth and our tribal members, and then we also opened up some availability to the public. And we went to our tribal building, and they did a healing ceremony for us. They smudged the building, and it was very intense, and it was very much needed. We actually hadn't even started using the building yet, so it was very nice to have them there. We were able to use our health center as a makeshift office for a few weeks, but that was, not everybody has those concessions to fall back on.
And you may have to deal with something as mundane as motions to disqualify the judge. I can't tell you how many motions I have seen since that day that were, we need to move this hearing out of the tribal court completely because there was a shooting, so nobody's safe at your court ever. There were motions for disqualify this judge because she presided over a hearing where 4 people were murdered and their case had nothing to do with it. And yet I've got to read all of this, and they're attaching transcripts of what happened. And I get to read all of that and have to make a ruling. And, oh, well, you know, your case is nothing like this one, and we're all telephonic, so I don't think you're going to be hurt. We hold a lot of telephonic hearings now, and they kind of tease me that I'll never show up in person, but I have. There are family members, though, that are affected by this, too, our own families. And they get concerned. I know your family was worried when you went back to work. Are you going to be safe in the building? And, you know, it's a personal safety question, too.
I
So-
was 6 months pregnant.
Yeah, she
during
was
the shooting.
pregnant when it happened.
And one of our other tribal members, she was about 7 months pregnant. And I helped her and her young son scale a fence so we could go hide across the way. And then it hits me, oh yeah, the police station is the next block over. But when you're in those situations, you don't even think of that. And that goes back to having that emergency plan where
You drill.
you know what's going on, because I didn't even think about that. I just thought, get out of the building, get everybody away from the building. And if we would have had an emergency plan, then that obviously would have been the first thing I thought of, like, okay, the police station is a block away.
But having the plan won't necessarily be enough. As Judge Burke said yesterday, you gotta read it, you gotta know it, and you gotta drill it. And the reason you drill it is because it becomes muscle memory. Like police officers and first responders, they have muscle memory. They do certain things because they train to do that. If you're not trained to leave the building and go to the meeting location and make the calls you're supposed to call and gather whatever or leave behind whatever, like they do on the airplanes, you know. They don't drill us, but the staff on the planes do drill. So we have to drill in our own courts. It sounds silly, but do it, because when the time comes, you're not going to be able to think what to do, but you will react according to your training. Go ahead. Oh,
Okay, well, we covered this one. Let's go over some more.
Yeah.
Next. Okay. These are some of the short-term effects that may happen that you may want to look at and understand. How do you deal with the physical injuries and death of staff, other key personnel, and families of staff? Know what counseling services that may be available that you can tie into if you have a behavioral health component to your Department of Health Services. Then you may want to use them. You may have outside counseling that you may be able to tie into. One of the things I think that's very fortunate for at least me being a chief judge, knowing what resources I have, is that I attend a meeting with my regional behavioral health authority to find out who's available if I have something that needs, that would come up that needs to have counseling brought to not only my building, but for mass counseling, but individually, that I know that they have that available. Questions, you know, are your hearings going to be audio or video recorded? And if so, how do you do that? How is it backed up? You know, what happens if the hearing becomes evidence? One of the rules in evidence is if you record something, okay, and you play it back and you modify it, it's no longer evidence. So they're going to take the original, but they can make you a backup, okay, so that you can retrain things. They keep the original, you get the backup. You know, insist on that. You know, can you hear your cases telephonically? Well,
we do now at Cedarville. They had passed the law just before our first hearing so that we could do telephonic hearings. But what we didn't have was a body of law to address the interruption in the middle of the hearing. They had some vague references to other jurisdictional law. So I drew upon my knowledge of those other laws to be able to say, okay, because they reference California law, under California law, I can find that this defendant, the shooter, I don't say her name, that's just my own thing. But in the hearings I do. But when I talk about her generally, she has no name. And so what I would say is the shooter voluntarily absented herself from the proceedings. She has chosen not to participate in this eviction hearing, so we can continue with the eviction hearing in her absence, and she is outside our jurisdiction because she's sitting in county jail waiting trial. But I had to go through and name how it is that I can get to finishing the hearing that was interrupted. Had to address the conflicts of interest. Are there court rules in place for presenting evidence or for obtaining evidence that is a copy of a recording that we need for our hearing? And by the way, if I know we're talking a lot, so please, you know, if you have things that you're thinking of or incidents, then yes, sir.
My question was, as far as the actual plan, how secure do you think you need? Do you need to keep your plan itself secure from outside people? I mean, because part of where I'm going with this is like I'm listening to I'm sorry, I forgot your name, Judge in the middle there.
Judge King.
Judge King.
Judge King. Judge King. You know, he sort of described you as their bomb scare protocol. well, if I'm thinking a step ahead here, I'm set up because I know if I call it a bomb scare, everybody's coming out, they're going here.
That's
Now,
correct.
I'm waiting for you because I never actually meant it. I'm never going to blow it up.
That-
But
that-
I'm now
that-
I've got you out in the open where I can get you.
Well, that's correct, okay? And some of the things that you need that I've learned in understanding this process is that the judge that got shot in Reno, Nevada, had someone show up to his house to buy a motorcycle. He didn't have a motorcycle for sale. I understand he got a motorcycle. So they were fishing. They wanted to find out what his patterns were. So you need to change those up. It's not, and if you have a plan, other people are going to have that plan. There are going to be other jurisdictions that will have that plan. And you can't account for it being top secret, need to know only, et cetera, because other people are going to have to see what they need to do if something were to happen. But you have alternative A, alternative B, alternative C. What are, again, goes back to those areas and perimeters. What are our safety perimeters? So I may have one jurisdiction that's clearing the immediate perimeter of zone of safety, I want to call it, but then I have another jurisdiction that's going to say, okay, now I got 2 miles out. What's happening around there? I'm going to make sure I don't have anybody that wants to take, become an active shooter or take people out in that particular area. And that's a situation that what really wasn't addressed, but should have been addressed and will probably be addressed at all concerts, outdoor concerts venues after the Las Vegas shooting, okay? I have a very good friend he's on the Department of Public Safety for the state of Arizona. He's Hopi, and he's one of their event coordinators. So he's done the Super Bowl, he's done, all kinds of events. He does the Cardinal games, the baseball games, et cetera. And he tells me that when they go in, they sit down before they have an event. Where are our exit strategies? What's our perimeter? And they start going out in concentric circles. And so now it's not just one agency, and unfortunately in tribes we have one agency. That's our tribal police. We have a tribal police department, or we may have, if we're PL 280, we have concurrent jurisdiction. You may have the state police or the local town police or city police jurisdiction. Where are the sheriff's departments? And police departments have mutual aid. Where are they looking at, et cetera? And it's one of those situations where you have a plan, but you have, if this area is closed off, we can't go there, where's our alternative meeting place? Who's in charge of the alternative meeting place? And where do we go from there?
So we talked about a number of these things already. Staff needing time off for physical recovery. We had people that were in the hospital for an extended amount of time. Staff that had to leave for funerals, and I'm sure you've all had to deal with working around that. So do you have someone cross-trained to take their place? Staff needing to attend court hearings and trials. The ethical question, as someone who bills a tribe under a contract of, I've been subpoenaed by the state to testify in a trial where I was working for the tribe and they pay me hourly, and exactly what is the right way to bill your time? I honestly, the day after the shooting, the two lawyers and I sat in a restaurant looking at each other going, what's the right way to bill this? And do we, or don't we? We were working. We can't get disability, can we? I don't know. There are questions that come up. You need to plan for those. There are some staff that may never be able to come back to work, but they may want to.
Yeah, you have to be prepared if you have staff that just cannot come back. If the trauma is too much for them, you have to be prepared to, unfortunately, let them go because you still have to run a tribe.
Run a court.
Or run a court.
Yeah.
Run the operation.
I do the whole thing. So.
There's a question.
Yes.
So do you suggest that any sort of like mental health clearance before people come back to work?
Well, physical and mental health. Sometimes you have HIPAA laws, et cetera, but if a person goes out and there's certain things, what do you require? A person's sick for 3 days, I don't know your personnel, your HR policy, you require them to bring a note saying they're clear to come back to work, correct? Something like that.
See,
You don't
we
have-
did not.
You don't have that?
No.
If they're out
Yeah,
Yeah.
do you have that in policy? We don't.
Oh, that they can't come in? Well, so they have to,
And really, what I'm dealing with is, because like, I'm not, I'm calling myself not, I'm really not. It's just the way I process with things.
okay,
I don't, I will come to work
right.
because I need to be working, I need to keep my mind busy.
It's-
But so there be something in place that stops me from coming to work because I'm more than likely, I'm not in the right mental state to be at work until you verify that I'm clear to come back.
Well, it's a person-by-person event, and I'm going to use Judge Lindsay as an example here. We attend the Arizona Judicial College conference every year. In this particular year, they did a security track because that's a big impetus that they're doing for all their state courts.
And they're doing it here.
buildings. Okay? They're doing it all over the place. Well, the beginning of their package was several court incidents, videos, that happened inside the court. People throwing chairs, et cetera. And when I saw that immediately, and I wasn't sitting at the table with Judge Lindsay, I was sitting in the back of the room, I went up and got her, I said, you may want to come with me, and you may not want to be there for the rest of these videos, because it may have a trigger adverse effect.
They already had, the first 3 videos were courtroom shootings. I was in the front of a banquet room with 600 people. I was nowhere near a quick exit. And so everyone at the table realized what was happening, and I just had my head down doing all my exercises. Then I'm going to teach some of you. And I was getting asked, are you okay? And I had my head down going, yeah, I'm fine, I'm fine. And I'm doing my breathing, I'm doing my different exercises to try to fight off a panic attack. And about that time, he comes up, puts his hands on my shoulders and said, are you all right? And I said, uh-huh. And he goes, you're not. And he got me up and took me out of the room. And by the time I got to the hallway, I was a basket case. I mean, Nikki and I talked about it. Every time there's a mass shooting, we rewrite our ride. Some are worse than others because things that happened at the Pulse shooting specifically happened during our shooting. And I know that because I try to avoid the media accounts, but I heard just enough to know, oh crap, they lived through what I did. There are things that happen in Vegas, and I had friends, and the best man from my wedding and his wife were involved in that. Physically unharmed, but I'll tell you what, the idea of knowing and talking to half a dozen people, and each of them had somebody, my kids knew somebody that was killed, it's really hard, because I go through it again. So counseling is something we need. Are we capable of doing our jobs? Sure, I can most days, all the time. I don't think I need a mental health clearance, but I'm going to be honest if it's something that I think is a bad day for me to do something. Because for about 3-4 days after a major mass shooting like Vegas, I was a basket case for, I don't remember the first 3 or 4 days after, honestly.
And
It's that bad.
You might want to have your counseling, that sort of, those stipulations put into a policy, because we did not have a policy like that. And actually, because we're so rural, we live in the middle of nowhere, our access to counseling is slim to none. And even the counseling we do have available, a lot of our tribal members are not comfortable utilizing. And so it is probably a good thing to think about that prior and to have something like that set up, because I know it would have really helped our tribal members immediately. And like, I never even stopped working. I think I didn't go to work for maybe 1 or 2 days because I was the only one that could keep everything going.
Signing the paychecks,
And one of the things that you
simple
may,
things.
it depends on leadership primarily. Who is your court administrator? Who are your chief judge or other judges there? And checking on your people. and just knowing what's going on with them. And the more you interact, because in courts, what I like to say is that we're a family, because one of the things that I do in my court, I have this code of conduct, which says you can't release information because we got all this confidential information and everything else. And when I have people come in and they sign it, I said, do you understand that, you could be at home talking to your family about what happened in the day, but I don't want to hear tomorrow on the street that John got arrested for DUI and that we found 12 pounds of heroin someplace and that a person has some other issues, because those are confidential things that happen in court. But I do want to know what's going on in your life. And I also say that I don't want to be the first phone call. I want to be the second phone call. First phone call, you may have to call somebody else, but I want to find out about it on Monday. I want to know what's going on with my people. So if I need to arrange to have someone come in to provide counseling, I can do that. Or if I need to refer you out to telecounseling, or if I need to say, hey, you have a good day today? Why don't you go home half a day and I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. Because you need to get your act together and figure out what's happening. That can happen, okay? And that's what happens sometimes. But that's the thing, I think, as a court administrator, you know your people. As chief judge, I know my people, and we go from there. We don't have a weapons policy, and weapon policies are hard in tribal nations because people hunt for subsistence. But you want to be careful of what you allow in court and out of court. And I was sitting in the lobby one time talking to tribal members about the court and what their viewpoints. And I have a court security person who just started, and he was supposedly wanted everybody. And I see this young man who has a juvenile hearing, and he has a folding knife in his pocket. So I told him to come here for a second. Pulled the knife out of his pocket and said, I'll tell you what, I'm gonna give this back to you after your proceedings and when you leave in the building, but I'm gonna hold on to it for right now. And so that's a training issue that I know that I have with my court security person, that they need to look and observe these types of things. But it gets better, and those are the types of things that I have to say, like Fox Valley, I believe they have a court security program. I believe that the American Probation Parole Association has one. I think there's some other organizations that have various level of court security programs, and those are the only two off the top of my head that I remember, and I'm not saying I'm endorsing one of them. But, look at least sending somebody, or if there's a webinar that's on, participating in the webinar, because I'm not going to say that I know everything, but I will say that I participate and listen to a lot of things, so therefore I get other answers. I go talk to people. If you have a U.S. Marshal Service that's close to you, they protect federal buildings, go, introduce yourselves, could you please help us? And oddly enough, they will do that, and it's tribal country, and it's federal, and they'll be more than happy because it's a source of pride for them. They can say, yeah, we helped these people out. And then, it's like, understand what PTSD is, okay? What I like to say is, when we talk about the ACEs study, everybody talks about adverse childhood experiences, right? And we've heard about that. How many people have heard about ACEs? Okay. And what do they say? That if you have 5 or 6, that you have some issues that you have to take care of, right? Well, maybe 2, but I think it's 5, okay? It's 5. But if you think about an Indian country, okay, what? Boarding school, you lose your language, you lose your culture, all the variety of things. I've gotten to 6 already, okay, without even starting. And then you add this on top of it, okay, so these are trauma-informed things that we need to understand. We need to understand when we talk about trauma-informed care, as we practice it as judges, as we practice it as social service workers, that we want doing it for our kids or our juveniles or our families. We need to make sure we practice that with our staff as well and our court users as well.
Yes.
I'd just like to attest to the PTSD and how there's a lot of people, I think, that work in the industry that wouldn't know that they even had it. Like, for me, I used to work at a hotel. I was an emergency responder there, and there are incidents that would happen every month, or deaths. Things would happen, and what one of the long-term effects that I've felt is locked doors, because every door there is locked, and most of the time that I'd be responding, there'd be something bad on the other side of the locked door, and it's something that comes up every once in a while still.
Exactly, that's a trigger. That's a trigger. That's like me with the Pulse nightclub. I was telephonic for this hearing, so when I was on the phone, it went dead, and I called back, and I called back to the building phone call, and I got voicemail. Every time I hear Cedarville's voicemail, I kind of get a little pull, and then I called cell phones, and I texted people, and I have had a number of times that when I've been unable to reach somebody else, or when I learned about the Pulse nightclub and the police walking through and hearing all the cell phones ringing, I knew what the family on the other side felt like, because that's what I did, and I couldn't get an answer. And so a dropped phone call can send me into that same place. And it's hard, but you have to know what your triggers are so you can deal with them. Another thing is, I had a mention up there of a place called the Rebels Project. And I know we're going 2 sessions, so hopefully some of you will be staying, and we're going to have more of an open discussion during the second session. But the Rebels Project is a support group that was started by kids that were at Columbine High School. And they exist strictly for support for people who have been through mass shootings, is how it started, because after the Aurora movie theater happened, the people at Columbine that were now adults said, we know how these people at the movie theater feel, and they don't even know what they're gonna feel. And it took me 18 months after our shooting before I found the Rebels Project. But it has members from every mass shooting, Bataclan, Orlando. We have people from Vegas. We have Cedarville. We invited Nikki into it. And it's an online Facebook support group. They do have once a year in-person meetings, but we talk to each other. And the rules are no politics and no judgment. But anybody can go on there anytime and say what they're feeling. And I'll tell you what, it's nice to know somebody else understands when you have a reaction to something as innocuous to somebody else as a closed door or a locked door, or having to know where the exits are.
Yes, I have to sit where I have to see all the exits at any given time. And one of the triggers that hit me that I would never have thought was there was a fire at a house a couple blocks over from the office just this last year. And I drove by and it was police tape. Like, I mean, it came out of nowhere. I'm just driving by and I'm like, okay, I need to pull over. And I wouldn't have thought that that was something that would hit me. Or when we flew into Las Vegas this last week, you fly in and first thing you see is the Mandalay Bay Resort. And was not quite expecting that either. So just things like that with the triggers, just knowing and understanding that, you know, your staff and so your tribal members, they're going through some, you know, they're going to go through these things that they're not going to even know are going to hit them. And being able to be
Right, be prepared for it.
empathetic enough to, you know, understand that that's going to happen.
I flew into Vegas about 2 hours ahead of her and texted her to say, you know, it's going to be tough in Vegas. Just, I didn't say Mandalay Bay's right there. And by the way, the fuel tanks that were hit with bullets are right next to the runway. And the people that ran from the scene ran onto the runway, so as you're landing, you're actually landing where people ran to try to stay alive. You know, it's hard, because I knew these things, and I fly into Vegas every other week, so it's like I'm used to it. That was home to me where that happened. I was there a couple days before the shooting at the venue. You know, it's really hard when you think about that. But what that does, and for your planning purposes, yeah, we have all these stories. The planning purpose you need to take home with you is, if it's happened to you or it's happened to your staff, you need to plan around it. the anniversary is coming for something, you better know when the anniversary is that your employee found their mother dead, or found their sister dead, or so-and-so was murdered, or we know every year February 20th is the date of the shooting.
And we actually closed the
Somebody,
office.
they closed the office, but somebody filed a motion to continue a hearing and said one of the option dates was February 20th. And, I read it and I'm like, yeah, no, not gonna happen. The first time being renewed and reappointed, my first reappointment date was 2 years after the shooting because I was appointed the day of the shooting. So we changed the date in the new contract so that we don't have to do that every anniversary. But know that the anniversary is coming. If it's something really traumatic for your staff, remember that date for them because they might not be really functioning top-notch for a couple days coming up before it or a couple days after. And if something similar happens to someone else, expect that this staff member might have that same ripple effect one more time. So be ready for it and know that they may not be at the top of their game in their performance. And it's nothing that they're doing willfully, it's just the way it happens. Now, we're about 4 minutes from the break, so what I'm thinking is.
I'm going to go through a couple of these really fast because we've covered a lot of the triggers and witnesses and stuff. Here are some resources that are there that are available to be able to come up with court security plans, best practices for security. The State of Colorado court system has a resource guide which could be used as a template. The Conference of Chief Justices have a security handbook that are there. I also included taking care of yourself after a traumatic event. This website has some interesting guidelines and checklists that you may want to be able to use in your own practice going forward. Does anybody have any additional questions or comments that they want to ask at this point in time?
I'm going to give you a technique to use for PTSD and for relaxation. So there's a couple of them that my counselor gave me, and depending on the time, different ones work. One is called butterfly tapping, and he always explained the physiological basis for these. So cross your arms across your chest and lightly tap your collarbone with your fingertips and go back and forth. The reason it works, and you just do this for a little while, but the reason it works is because it's crossing the signals in your brain and it's making your right side and your left side cross with each other, and you can't go into that place that your panic may take you. So it physically takes you out of it. Walking 20 minutes a day does the same thing because you're moving both arms and both legs, and it actually crosses both sides of your brain and makes your right and your left side both work at the same time, but you can't focus into one area. Another method I use is, if you're good with numbers, do math problems in your head. Do the weirdest math problems you can. Just addition and subtraction is plenty, but put the numbers in and run them in your head. And the reason is because if you're concentrating on that and getting frustrated because you can't do the math, you're not thinking about whatever was going to put you into a panicking mood. Or running random numbers. So a lot of times if something's happening, as I sat in that conference, 17, 3, 42, 1, 7, 9, 11, 85, 357, and I'm in my head, I'm running the weirdest random numbers. I sometimes repeat them, but because I get my brain working on the numbers, I'm no longer working on what was starting to make me panic. And so those are some, and then the last one is I'm going to give you a breathing technique. And then you do your evaluations, take your break, come back. So the breathing you can do 3 or 4 times in a row. You will not hyperventilate. And you can do it several times a day. So I want you to, you're going to inhale deeply on a 7 count. and then hold it for 4, and then purse your lips and force the air out on an 8 count. And the reason is it forces oxygen deep into your lungs, which causes you to release some enzymes in your body that will help calm the panic. So let's do the inhale. Hold. Exhale. You can repeat that about 3 or 4 times. It's amazing how calm you'll be after about 2 or 3 of those. But it really helps a lot. Last point and you're out of here. Complete your evaluations.
And contact information, it's my understanding that people in NAICJA will be putting this up on the website, so they'll have links and stuff like that to be able to be used. And I want to thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions or things that you think of in the future, feel free to send an email. And I may not get back to you right away, but I will get back to you.
And
Come back for the next session.
yeah, the next session, we're going to do more of an open discussion about what you've done at your courts and what suggestions you have that we could all take with us. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.